Our next speaker is John Day. John, can you please share your screen and turn on your microphone and camera? John is from James Cook University, and his talk is titled A Lattice of Leadership and Followership were both critical in the transformative success of the Great Barrier Reef rezoning. Thank you very much, John. When you're ready, can you please turn on your camera and your microphone? We can see your slides there. We're now just waiting for your camera. There we go. You're ready to go, John.
Thanks, Alana. Many of you will recognise this map. It shows the current zoning for the Great Barrier Reef that came into effect in mid-2004. Some of you may be aware of the previous zoning shown by the map on the left, which evolved over the period from the late 1970s to 2004. Many folks are not aware of the details of the rezoning that led to this, the transformative policy reform process. My presentation today will highlight how leadership and followership were both critical in this policy reform. In my PhD, I investigated the GBR rezoning program. I refer to it as the RAP rezoning, as it really comprised two concurrent planning programs. And my primary objective was to examine what were the key determining factors that led to the successful zoning outcome. Chapter 6 of my thesis focuses on the role of leadership in the RAP rezoning. That is, leadership at all levels and across all sectors, not just within the agency GBRMPA. This quote from Per Olsen et al. Refers to the role of leadership in the RAP rezoning. No one to date, however, has examined that role in any detail. How leadership emerged beyond just the entitled executive leaders during the RAP rezoning became one of the significant aspects of my research. This diagram shows the entire planning process that led to the RAP rezoning. I've listed here some of the relevant literature. Much has been written on the theoretical aspects of leadership, but leadership in a real-world environmental policy has been far less studied. Very few papers address leadership in the GBR. Two notable examples are the paper by Olsen et al. And another by Louisa Evans et al. Leadership did occur throughout the planning process, but leadership played a very significant role once the formal part of the planning process commenced and GBRMPA started to engage the wider public. As part of my PhD, I conducted 38 semi-structured interviews. I composed a stratified and purposeful list of those to be interviewed. This comprised a diverse range of key individuals who played different roles in the RAP rezoning, including 6 politicians ranging from federal ministers to local MPs, 3 political advisors in both state and federal politics, 12 key sectoral actors, including scientists, NGOs, tourist operators, peak body representatives, local government, and several chairs of GBRMPA's local marine advisory committees. 11 GBRMPA officers involved in the RAP and rezoning, from the executive director to base grade planners, and 3 Queensland officers who are also involved in their complementary Queensland zoning. All my interviews were face-to-face and audio recorded. They ranged from less than an hour to over 2.5 hours. Of my 15 interview questions, 6 questions were specifically about leadership. All my interview questions provided qualitative data, and 4 of the 6 leadership questions also gave me quantitative data. Shown here are 2 of the worksheets that were filled in by the interviewees during the interview. The top one required them to identify key actors across the 3 different phases of the RAP rezoning. The bottom worksheet asked them to rate the leadership traits for 4 individuals who they considered were leaders during the rezoning. To analyse my audio files, I used 2 software programs. These generated draft transcriptions, many of which needed to be corrected. The real value of these verbatim transcripts was dozens of very pertinent quotes relating to my research. I assessed and coded all the worksheets into spreadsheets for analysis. Among my research challenges was the fact that I was an insider researcher, given my role in the RAP and rezoning. One insider issue that I needed to address was that I had previous dealings with nearly all those I interviewed. This required me to deal with issues of bias, impartiality, and familiarity. In question 4, interviewees were asked to identify individuals who played key roles during the RAP rezoning. From this table, you can see 47 individuals and 28 groups were identified. For this part of my thesis, I've used broad types of actor rather than individual names. Some examples of the groups named were the peak body for commercial fishers, the Queensland Seafood Industry Association, or the group of planners within GBRMPA. In question 5, interviewees were asked to indicate in which of the 3 phases of the RAP rezoning did these individuals or groups mainly contribute. For these word clouds, I chose to show roles rather than individual names. The size of the text in the word cloud indicates the frequency that person or group was identified. And the colours on the right-hand side indicate the broad groupings used in the word clouds. For example, here all scientists are shown pink. These 3 word clouds illustrate the key players in the 3 phases of the RAP rezoning. These are quite complex, so rather than expect you to see the changes over the 3 phases, I've listed some of the key points here. The CEO and chair of GBRMPA was a predominant name identified in all 3 phases. Similarly, the executive director was also a key player across the 3 phases. Scientists were obvious in phase 1, but were identified less in phases 2 and 3. The leadership roles of politicians increased notably from phase 1 to phase 3. Some significant names, for example, the Prime Minister, were only identified in phase 3. Similarly, Queensland was not a major contributor until phase 3. Across all my interviews, 6 leaders were repeatedly identified as playing a major role across the 3 phases of the RAP rezoning. This table shows those 6 identified leaders. Perhaps not surprisingly, the CEO and chair of GBRMPA was identified as a key leader by 86% of all those interviewed. Of interest was the fact that the CEO and chair, Virginia Chadwick, needed to be convinced when she was first introduced to the RAP rezoning. Her early reaction was, why would we do this? This is not politically achievable. However, once Virginia accepted the vision and what might be achieved, she became one of the biggest advocates for the policy reform and was an amazing leader. 4 of the 6 individuals shown here worked at GBRMPA. Another key leader was the federal minister. Interestingly, one identified leader was not part of the agency or the government. That was the NGO campaign manager who worked for the World Wildlife Fund. I'll speak more about her leadership role later. In question 8, interviewees were first asked to consider these 12 leadership traits, adapted from a paper by Evans et al. They were then asked to assess each of these 12 traits for the 4 leaders they chose as being key during the RAP rezoning by using a simple scoring system, 0 meaning trait not applicable, up to 3 for highly applicable. When added across all my interviews, the sum numbers enabled me to rank all the traits for each chosen leader. Here I've allocated a different colour to each of the traits and then used those same colours to depict these traits for the 6 key leaders previously chosen as playing a major role across all phases of the RAP rezoning. This matrix shows the 6 leaders across the columns. Don't try to analyse the detail, as I'll give you some examples shortly. The rows depict the prioritised traits for each leader. The highest priority traits at the top of the matrix and the lowest priority traits at the bottom. What I do want you to recognise is the patchwork of colours or different traits, showing different leaders having differing priority traits. Some of these were indicative of their position or aligned to the role they played. This patchwork effectively shows the lattice of leadership, a term that was first used by Ewer. For example, this trait of securing political support was the highest rated trait for 3 of the identified leaders, but the lowest trait for 2 other key leaders. The trait of delivering results was a highly rated trait for 5 out of the 6 identified leaders. So the lattice of leadership is an interweaving of skills and traits. These complementary skills and traits make up the lattice, with some skills predominant at times, and then at other times those same skills were in the background. However, all these traits contributed to the ultimate success of the program. Here are some quotes from my interviews. First is a quote from the federal minister at the time, David Kemp. I've identified David here and obtained his approval, as it's obvious the minister said, I took the view that the RAP rezoning had a chance of being successful because of the leadership and political skill that Virginia Chadwick brought to the position. This relationship between the minister and the CEO is an important part of the rezoning story. Without their combined political leadership, the RAP rezoning would never have overcome the political complexities in Canberra. And their political leadership was one of the many reasons for the overall success of the policy reform. The second quote is about Imogen Zethoven, the GBR campaign manager for the WWF. Most of the politicians I interviewed spoke highly of Imogen, but less well known was Imogen's pivotal role in bringing all the NGOs on side during the RAP rezoning. Initially, most NGOs were opposed to the RAP proposal and had to be convinced to support it, but that's another story for another time. The third quote is important because it introduces the role of teams within GBRMPA. As mentioned here, it was an organisation-wide effort, which leads on to another important realisation, and that is the significance of effective followership. The important interrelationship between leaders and followers is summed up in this quote from Bukestad et al. The effectiveness of a leader is to a great extent dependent on the willingness and consent of the followers. Without followers, there can be no leaders. Followership in GBRMPA was facilitated by many effective teams, each with their own effective leader. Collectively, these all played significant roles during the RAP rezoning, and the team spirit was also a key aspect. So my conclusions about the role of leadership in a transformative policy reform was that during the RAP rezoning, Virginia Chadwick, the CEO and chair, was widely regarded as an extremely effective and transformational leader. However, her exceptional leadership alone would not have achieved the success of the RAP rezoning. It was a multi-team effort comprising a wide range of complementary teams or groups, mostly within GBRMPA, but also outside the agency, each with their own effective leader. Among the significant contributions to the success of the RAP rezoning policy reform were the complementary lattice of leadership, the political leadership shown by Virginia and David Kemp in Canberra, and committed followership within GBRMPA, encouraged and coordinated by an effective leadership duo. Recalling my primary objective to examine the key determining factors that led to the success of the rezoning. In addition to the key elements of effective leadership just outlined, my research shows 3 further broad determining factors contributed to the overall success of the RAP rezoning. A sound underpinning of science, plus effective public engagement, plus political ability and acumen. The extent to which these all these key determinants were interrelated is addressed in my thesis, and they'll all be addressed in my pre-completion seminar in 3 weeks' time. Thank you.